Good morning. Welcome to the Academic Resources Conference. This is done virtually, and I really miss being with you all in person. Little did we know 2 years ago when we had our last in person meeting that we weren't going to be able to see each other for a while. However, a lot of you have still been working. It's been a rough year. A lot of you have taken on additional duties. A lot of you have worked under some very trying circumstances. So, today I'm going to talk to you about how to be successful in getting more money for your job and to get paid for the work that you're doing. In the CSU, there are several ways to get more money. There's the general salary increase and the service salary increase. Both of those are done at the bargaining table between the unions and the chancellor's office. That you have no control over. If they settle for 3% a year, that's what you're stuck with. A lot of people think, oh, well, there's other ways to get more money. And when you take a job at the CSU, you automatically assume that at some point you're going to get the top of the range. So when they tell you that the pay range is 3,000 a month to 4,000 a month, you think someday you're going to be at $4,000 a month. Wrong. Unfortunately, that's not the case because as the general salary increases go up, so do the ranges. So if you're at the $3,000 mark and you get a 3% raise, that's base salary for your classification will go up that 3% as well. So you actually never progress. 60% of our employees currently at the CSU are in the bottom quarter percentile of their range. What do I mean by that? Every job on campus has a classification with a pay range. And if you're an academic uh, support assistant one, you will start at the bottom of the salary and you hope someday to get to the top. Unfortunately, that almost never happens. So today we're going to talk about how to work the system and how to progress through the ranges and how to become successful in advancing your career. So the next opportunities we have are called an in-range progression and a reclassification or in-class progression. Those are where I'm going to focus pretty much today. There are several other ways to get more money. One would be emergency pay, shift differential, stipend or temporary lead work, or bonuses. Those are temporary and they don't actually affect your salary in the long term or your retirement. So I'm not going to delve into those too much. So I'm talking about classification and qualification standards. Many of you have no idea what that is. The CSU uses classification and qualification standards, or CQS to be short. You know how we love to shorten all of our names. The CQS is a statewide standard which applies to every campus in the CSU. The salary ranges for each job are based in the CQS, but every employee has the right to be paid for the work that they perform. So if you are hired in one classification, you have the right to be paid for anything done in that classification. So now we're going to talk about how do you go to a new classification or how do you progress through the range in your classification. So what's the difference? So a reclassification or in-class progression is movement between one class or skill level and another class or skill level. The duties performed are at a higher skill level and it's a permanent assignment. That's a minimum 5% pay increase. So that would be like an academic support assistant to an academic support coordinator. An in-range progression is movement within a class or skill level. There's no change to your classification. So it allows you to move within the salary range as you assume more responsibility and skills. That has a minimum of a 3% pay increase. Now, I say minimums because a lot of times when you apply for one of these, human resources will try and tell you, oh, well, the maximum you can get is 3% or 5%. Nowhere have we ever agreed that that would be a maximum. That is the base that you can receive. So they have different procedures. A lot of people think it's automatic. You're going to move from one to the next. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Getting a upgraded class or in range progression or reclassification is not an automatic. So you have to apply for these individually. So for a reclassification or in class progression, you need an updated position description. You submit your request to your supervisor, and your supervisor must forward this request to HR within 30 days. Then HR has 180 days to complete this review. Now, keep in mind that your supervisor may or may not know what they're supposed to do with it. So, what I ask people to do, or what I've done on my campus, is I've had people walk a copy over to HR, have it date and time stamped, and let them know that I have submitted this to my supervisor and that they should be expecting it within the 30 days. Then I put a little reminder on my calendar to make sure and go back and check with my supervisor that they've forwarded it. Now, for an in-range progression, you have to fill out a form normally on your campus website. It's a justification for the request. Once again, they're going to ask for an updated position description. Are you seeing a trend here? So we're going to be talking about position descriptions in a little bit, but I want you to keep in mind and start thinking about how you would go about it and how you will approach it. Once again, your employee request is submitted to your supervisor. Supervisor must forward it within 30 days, and then HR has 90 days to complete this review. Now remember, the in-range progression is only a 3%, and the reclassification is a minimum 5%. So if you're going to apply for something or go through this work, I always recommend that you go for the reclassification. And then if you have to settle for an in-range progression, you're still ahead of the game. So let's talk about your classification and the position description. How do they relate? What counts is not how much you do or how many different things you do or how well you do them, but it's the level of the work that you do. It's not about your performance and workload. I can't tell you how many people have come to me and said, oh, but I've had outstanding performance evaluations. I run the office all by myself. That really does not matter when you're talking about reclassification or an in-range progression, because it's about the skill level. The criteria for a reclassification is the complexity of the work that you're doing, difficulty, the degree of independence, and where does your work come from? Is it given to you by a lead or a supervisor, or do you pretty much decide on your own what needs to be done? The authority to commit resources, money, labor, and things, the amount of independent judgment required, the types of problems solved, and the consequences of errors. Now, I tell people as they're building their reclassification paperwork to keep copies of all these different types of things. So if, for example, you've solved a problem in your department, keep copies of all the stuff that you did from recognizing to the problem to coming up with a solution. Reclassification or in-class progression. Let me give you an example. Reclassification or in-class progression. I'm going to give you some examples. And I'm going to use the administrative support series because it's one of the ones that is more clearly defined. So the administrative support is a series which contains two classifications, the administrative support assistant and the administrative support coordinator. Each classification has two skill levels. There's an administrative support assistant 1 an administrative support assistant 2. There's an administrative support coordinator 1, an administrative support coordinator 2. To move from the admin support assistant to an admin support coordinator, that's a reclassification. To move from an admin support coordinator 1 to an admin support coordinator 2 is an in-class progression. So as you can tell, that they're pretty, it sounds the same, but it's very different. So let's get started. The first thing I want you to do is to write down everything you do. Everything, keep a little notepad next to your desk, write it down as you do it. You also have to remember all the things that you do on a yearly basis. For example, our departments are very involved in planning graduations, things like that. They're only done once a year, so you have to make sure that you notate all the things you do for the graduation, because you're going to update your position description. You're going to get some copies of your actual assignments, things that you've accomplished. If you've created an in-depth spreadsheet or a budget analysis or anything like that, you're going to have a copy of that. I want you to review similar job postings, both on campus and other campuses. Now, when you're reviewing other campuses, what you have to keep in mind is that you want to review campuses that are similar in size and scope of the one that you are currently at. For example, comparing my campus at Fresno State, I would use Stanislaus, some Los Angeles, because the FTEs are very similar. Stanislaus I would use because the location. I would not compare myself to a large campus like San Diego, where they have a lot larger FTEs, and by that I mean more students, more demands, more departments. Then you're going to have other documentation, emails, anything that will help substantiate your request. Classification and qualification standards. Now, most of you have not looked at these, so I'm going to give you the website. It's calstate.edu/hradmin/classification. And I want you to go through and look at your current classification and see what are the standards for that. And then look at some others. Now, logically, if you want to go from a support coordinator 1 to a 2, you could look at those differences. But if you also look at, for example, if you do a lot of graphics, you might want to look at some of the graphics series, or you might want to look at some of the IT series if you do a lot of work on the internet or highly technical things. So you may have to look around and find other classifications that may be suited to you as well. One of the things that I always remind people is that don't just look at one. For example, an admin analyst is a higher classification, which has more technical skills, and maybe that's where you belong versus the admin support series. Then also you want to attach any degrees, certificates, or any awards you have of enhanced skills. For example, if you've completed your bachelor's degree and it's in human resources and you work for the human resources department, you want to make sure that that's included in your request as well. So another way you want to look at it, you do what, to what or whom, to achieve what outcome, what level of difficulty. Give examples. Right here, I'm going to give you an example from my work. I worked for the Department of Military Science, Army ROTC, on campus. I was the only university person that worked in the office. Everybody else was assigned there by the Army. So my work was very specialized, and my working title was University Liaison. But we just discovered very early on that we were having a problem that Some of our cadets or students were getting close to graduation and had not completed all of the classes necessary to graduate and receive their commission in the Army. So I went out and I started looking, and I saw on campus that there were several options, and I could run reports and check their progress on where they were academically and what they still had to achieve. And then I set up a system whereby I ran their completion, all the classes they completed, make sure they passed, as well as what needed to be taken for them to graduate. And then I sat down with the students every year and went over that, especially as they got into their junior and senior year. This actually eliminated the problem of our cadets coming up and thinking they were going to graduate and not being ready. I know that there are counselors on campus that do that, but a lot of the students don't go to their counselor to double check that they are on target. With the Army cadets, since they're getting paid to go to school and they're paid for only 4 years, we wanted to make sure that they did not get into a situation where they had to go over and go fifth semester or sixth semester. So when I applied for my uh, reclassification, I included that documentation in what I did to solve that problem. So if you've solved a problem in your department like that, or something from your department, give those kinds of examples and include what you did to solve that problem. Focus on what you do and the level at which you do it, not how much you do or how well you do it. Like you, I received outstanding performance evaluations my entire uh, career at Fresno State. The problem was my job performance was outstanding, but I never progressed past an ASA1. I started as an ASA1, and when I went back and looked, it's because my job description had never been updated. The first 10 years, I was an ASA1, and I looked at it. Basically, an ASA1 answers phones, does the basic level of entry work, and I never updated my position description, assuming wrongly that my supervisor or HR would do that. No, you have to review your position description and make sure it gets updated. So, update a position description. Make a list of all the duties you perform, and I want you to shift the emphasis to your highest skill level and responsibilities. And I'm going to give you some examples. I want you to use words like developed, administered, arranged, created, developed. You know, you can process the mail, or you can collate and distribute and process and facilitated incoming requests for information. Sounds completely different than I handle the mail that's coming in. So I want you to kind of gear it towards the highest level of where you want to go. So back to the position description. Shift the emphasis away from those lower level tasks in support of the higher level responsibilities. I'm going to tell you a little story. It's called The Legend of the Stonecutters. 3 stonecutters were working at their jobs when a passerby stopped to ask, "What are you doing?" The first answered, "I'm cutting stone." The second one said, "I'm building a wall." And the third said, "I'm creating a cathedral." Like the stonecutters, your tasks have different meaning depending on your perspective. So I want you to redefine your task towards you're building the cathedral, not that you're cutting a stone. So there's several criteria human resources will use when evaluating your request. The complexity of the work that you do, the degree of independence with which you work, Where does your work come from? Is it self-generated or assigned by a higher level employee? The authority to commit resources, the amount of independent judgment used, the types of problems solved, and the consequences of an error. If you make a mistake, does someone catch it? If not, what harm would be done? What type of supervision do you have? Is it direct, where there's somebody close and regular? General supervision, where there's some delegation of responsibility and some independence? General direction, operates independently under broad guidelines, or you work as a team, not supervised. In my job, basically, my department chair said, "This is where I want. This is what I want to accomplish." He or she had no idea how to get there, but that's what they want. I used to tell people, my boss would come to me and say, "Nancy, I want to put an elephant on the roof." It was my job to figure out how to get the thing up there, how to feed it, how to take care of it, and what to do with it while it was there. So think about what it is you do and how you make it work. Focus on the level at which you do. Use good English. Grammar counts. Use spell check. Use a thesaurus. Whatever it takes, make sure that your request is properly formatted and there's no spelling mistakes. I can't tell you how many people who are applying for an admin support coordinator. I get their request and I'd look and there were so many spelling mistakes. It was insane. Write in complete sentences, keep your verbs consistent, and keep from personalizing it. Remember, you're writing a job description. Now, when you're done with it, what I want you to do is find somebody you trust in another department or who doesn't have a knowledge of what you do on a day-to-day basis, because you want somebody outside the department who can look at this and say, "What do you mean by you disseminate information? What kind of dissemination do you do?" So have a buddy look at it before you turn it in. Let them ask the questions, because I can guarantee if it's too difficult, HR won't ask the questions. They'll just kick it back and say denied. We don't want that to happen. We want you to be successful. The criteria for an IRP, remember that's an in-range regression, is the assigned application of new or enhanced skills, retention, equity, performance, out of classification work that does not warrant a reclassification, increased workload, or new lead work or project coordination, or other salary related criteria. So right here, I'm going to stop for a minute because the CSU has what they call a 50% rule. Nobody acknowledges this rule exists, but it does. If more than 50% of your job is in a higher classification, you will get reclassified. If it's under 50%, it will be considered other duties as assigned. So what you want to make sure is that more than 50% of your job is in the higher classification or in the classification you want to go into. Otherwise, they may come back and say, "Oh, you don't qualify for a classification or reclassification, and you have to ask for an IRP," because that is one of the criteria for the IRP is the out of classification work. But keep in mind, the other thing that happens is they update your position description. So it's difficult when you go back again to try and get the higher classification. Increased workload. All of us have had increased workload. People retiring, people getting laid off, people leaving the department. Where does that work go? It doesn't evaporate. It doesn't go to the manager. It comes to us. So you want to make sure you can document, there used to be 5 people in my department. Now there's 2 of us, and we've all taken on that extra work. So that's would be criteria for an IRP. So when you're talking about the acquisition of new or enhanced skills, it must relate to your current position. So think about what skills have you acquired. If you've gone through customer service training, or you've gone through PeopleSoft training, or you've gone through some sort of financial training, and those are parts of your job, then you can definitely use those. And are these critical in carrying out the requirements of the position? If you went and you got a counseling degree and you're not a counselor and you're just uh, an admin support coordinator, you have to make sure that you can relate what you got and how it applies to your current position. Are your enhanced skills effective, adding value to the university? You have to be able to talk about how it brings more value. Are they ongoing or temporary? And if you've just taken on a lead position, make sure that you identify what parts of your position are you are serving in a lead role, and make sure it's not part of the classification standard already. Internal equity. If you go out and you look and you say, this department over here has the same number of faculty, same number of students, but they have 3 more people, or they have everybody in that department earns substantially more than I do, then you could apply for an in-range progression. How is your position critical to the mission of the university? In my situation, I was the only person with the university that worked in the department, so everybody else worked for the Army. If there's an equity issue, make sure you spell it out. If you wish to compare to another campus, so if you wish to use the Department of Communications on another campus, make sure it is a similar in size, enrollment, and FTEs. Retention. This is a tough one because we all know that retention is not really an issue with the university, or they don't consider it that important. I always found it alarming that the brain drain that was happening with all of the people that have been retiring from the university, we were losing a lot of our historical knowledge. But unfortunately, the university never felt that that was that important. But think about what would be the impact on the university if you left. In my situation, I had been trained by the Army to do their human resources processing for the cadets. I'd also worked for the university for 25 years. So I had a lot of history. So that was critical when I was applying for my reclassification, because if I left, there's nobody else that had those qualifications. And somebody walking in is not going to have the training and the background that I had. The other one would be is if you get offered a job at an outside the university, say at a community college or another university in your area, you can use that to apply for an in-range progression. Employee performance. This is one of the criteria for an IRP. I have never seen it successful. HR's argument on that is if we give you one, we have to give all the people who were outstanding one. I never felt that was a valid excuse, because I feel that most of our employees did deserve them and we all deserved them, but that did deter them from offering this as the only basis, and other salary related criteria. So make sure that you spell it out in depth. Frequency of request. You can only request an in-range progression up to 12 months following the receipt of the response. So if you applied in March and you got a response in June, you don't get to apply for another one until the following June. Now, if it was denied solely on lack of funds, you can ask for it to be reopened in the following fiscal year. So if it comes up in June and then in July, the state budget allocates more money to the CSU, you can actually ask for your application to be reevaluated. There are no limit on the number of requests that can be submitted by your supervisor. So if you're not successful, you can ask your supervisor to request one. So I'm going to stop right there for a minute because a question has come in. What if my employer does not support my request? There's several stages can that happen in this process because you have to take your job description and your request to your supervisor. So if they don't agree with your job description, there's your first issue. So we need to talk about that because I've had situations where the first application that I put together, I was an admin support assistant, one, and I was doing the department budgets. That's not an ASA one part of their position. So I applied for an in-class, I applied for an reclass at that point, and my supervisor informed me that I did not do budgets, which was news to me because I had emails, I had all these things asking for budget information. Unfortunately, when they turned it into HR, they said she doesn't do budgets. Well, you can pretty well guess at my surprise to discover I don't do budgets. So the next time my boss was going to a meeting and he wanted a copy of the budget, I looked at him and I said, I don't do that. That's what you told me. And you can imagine how well that went over. Needless to say, I transferred to another department shortly thereafter. So be careful what you put in there. And if they say you don't do a particular job, then don't do it. Because if you're not going to get paid to do a job, or they're not going to even acknowledge that you're doing the job, then you need to eliminate it from your position description and not do it. And if you have issues with that, you can contact your union steward or someone and have them take it up for you. The other thing that comes up often, and I get this question a lot, is on my performance evaluation, they rated me on my supervisory skills, but they tell me I don't supervise. Well, how can you be rated on something that you don't do? So you need to make sure that all of your documentation is in a row and that everything is spelled out. So before you submit this, just look at all of the items and make sure they all are in line. The effective date of your increase is no later than the first pay period following receipt of the review. So if I apply for a reclassification or an in-range progression on March 30th, even though it takes 180 days, it would be effective April 1st. So keep that in mind. It doesn't matter whether you apply March 1st or March 30th, it still would be effective April 1st. If you are turned down for a request, please contact your union representatives. There's a lot of things that can happen. They can ask for a review, they can file an appeal. There's a lot of abuses and violations. And they can review the campus policy because every campus should have a promotion and IRP policy. So every person on campus should have the opportunity to train and promote in their career. The campus should use IRP or reclassification to make sure that all employee progress within their pay ranges are done on a regular basis. Like I said, because it's not automatic, we have to be very, very careful and make sure that that happens for each and every employee. Because I can't tell you in my 25 years at Fresno State how many employees came to me and said, I thought I would get to the top of my range. And I would just look at them and I just, because I would do these workshops and I would explain these to people, and they still thought that it was going to be automatic, and it's not automatic. So I have some questions that have come in. What if your supervisor doesn't support your request? That makes it much more difficult, but not impossible. So a lot depends on where you work on campus. If you're working in a department and it's your faculty chair that doesn't support your request, then take it to your dean and sit down with them and say, these are the things that I do. I would like to get it acknowledged, and I would like to apply, and see if you can gain their support. Because sometimes if you have a chair of your department, they don't understand the difference in the classifications because they don't have it. And so you want to make sure that you have to educate them on how this works. So what if you apply and you get turned down? Don't give up. Keep trying. Keep coming back and look at what it is you're doing and what you're putting on your paperwork, and see where you're lacking. For example, on skill level, if you're not including all of the skills, then you need to make sure that you document some of those skills. I had a woman who came to me and she worked for information sciences, and she did a lot of surveys and a lot of work on campus and working with campus departments and setting up surveys and serving and trying to evaluate statistics and all of these things. But they kept saying, oh no, you don't qualify for the higher level. And she's like, but I have all this stuff. So I had her put all of that stuff together, all of those things that she developed, and put them in a packet. And I don't care if your packet's 2 inches thick. You need to make sure that all of it is there. Supervisor does not have to support the request. What really is important is if they're agreeing with this is what your job says, that's what's important. If your job parameters are these items, then that's what the job is. And that skill level and that standard of pay needs to be at a certain level. So I guess it depends on how essential are those skills. And it goes back to how essential are those skills to the job or to the university. Because over time, all of our jobs have become more technical and required more learning, more programs, all sorts of technical things that we've had to improve on. Is that required, or is that not required? Is it just nice to have? If it's nice to have, then that person has the opportunity to not do them because that's not part of the job that they were hired to do. What is, if it becomes part of the base level and what is required, then they deserve to be paid at the higher level. And this, but they also have the opportunity to say, you're not doing budgets anymore, and the manager can do it themselves. Yep. And that's okay. Now, yep. If I happen to love doing budgets, then I'm going to apply for another job on campus that does allow for that and probably pays me to do it. Those are always options that the campus has. They can take the duties away. They can reassign you to another position that you may not like the new department as well. And that's part of what I said when I said we are guaranteed a job at our classification, not necessarily the same department or the same one you have. First of all, I would say be persistent. Be your own advocate and stand up for yourself. As a woman of a certain age, I never felt good putting myself out there and requesting raises. You know, I just was the little worker bee sitting in the back doing all those things. And it took a lot for me to be able to get the gumption to actually file for a reclass and an in-range progression and to fight for it and to do the work that was necessary, because I was of the generation where if you just work hard, do well, it'll get acknowledged and it'll get rewarded. That is not the case anymore. And you need to remember that you are your biggest advocate. And if you don't toot your own horn, nobody's going to toot it for you. Because every time you got that general salary increase of 2 or 3% or whatever they negotiated, the salary range for that position went up. So new people coming in actually can get hired at a higher range than you are. Yeah, it does not work in our disfavor. It actually works in our favor. Because as we move to another level, that opens up those entry level positions for other people to come in, because they're not going to hire necessarily if there's a position on campus and it's, I'm going to put it out there, administrative analyst position, which is a highly technical position, higher than the administrative support series. People on campus are going to apply for that job first. So people who have spent time on campus and have the skill level necessary are going to apply for that job, because all the campuses open positions at the campus level for 2 weeks prior to opening to the public. So if those people move up into that position, that opens up the administrative support coordinator or the administrative support assistant that they were to the general public or to younger people coming in. I feel like I sometimes give too much and I repeat some things because I want people to understand, because a lot of people think, oh, if I just do a lot of work, it's okay. Well, if it's a lot of the same work, it doesn't change where you are. So it has, you know, and that's a hard thing to get across to people, because they go, oh, well, I took on 3 people's job and it's all the same job. You're not going to get a higher classification. You may get an in-range progression, but you're not going to get a higher classification. And that happens a lot. And it has happened on campus where the person has applied for that higher position, where the person they're currently working for says, well, I'll reclassify you to that, or I'll put your salary at the same. And if you love your job, that's really what you want anyway. The thing that I always had difficulty with on campus is, if you love your job, the only way to progress is basically to leave your job, which I always thought was interesting. If you love who you work for and they love you, the only way to progress is to leave it. And see, the other problem is that a lot of the department chairs don't have control of the department budget. So the department chair that I may work for loves me, thinks I walk on water, but they don't do the budget. The dean does. So I'm going to stop now. And if you have any questions, you can text them to me right now at, I'm at area code 559-287-3378. and I will try and address them. Otherwise, you can email me at Nancy Kabota at nancyko54@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to respond to them. So either way, thank you for participating today. I really appreciate you being here, and I look forward to when we can get together in person again, so we can have more interaction and be able to sit down and talk one on one. Anyway, thank you very much.